Going back to 2019, I had to move out of my childhood home due to money issues. It took my parents well over 2 months to find a house for us to rent. Lucky enough, a week before we had to move, my dad found a place only a few streets down. The house was a 2-story home that sat on the very edge of a popular horse farm. We moved in, and surprisingly, everything felt okay from the first night we moved in, up until a few days later. There were 2 bathrooms in the home, one upstairs and one downstairs. For the first few days, I used the upstairs shower, seeing as my mom had not yet purchased a curtain for the downstairs shower. When she finally did, I decided to shower downstairs. While rinsing my hair and closing my eyes, I had one of the most terrifying feelings come over my entire body. I felt nausea, chills, instant goosebumps, and a sudden pounding headache. I quickly rinsed my hair out and opened my eyes. The second I did, the feeling lifted and was gone just as fast as it arose. However, when I opened the shower curtain, the towels that were there on the shelf were now on the floor. It was odd, I will admit, but at the time I just blamed the whole situation on being in a new place. As for the towels, maybe it was the cat. Everything was calm for a long time. The towels would continue to fall on the floor, but I would just blame the cat. Fast forward about a month, a close friend of mine texted me very early in the morning. He asked if the house I moved into was the one on the farm. I responded with yes, expecting him to want to stop by after school to check the place out. But I was never prepared for what he said next. He proceeded to tell me a story about the place that his friend shared with him. She used to do horseback riding at the barn. He explained that the home was haunted. After so much time of being at the barn, she refused to even go at night due to the strange things she would encounter there. Now, I don't remember exactly how her story went, but I do remember being absolutely horrified afterwards. After hearing this story, I decided to look into the house to see what I could find about the property, which had been standing there since the late 1800s. Took me a few days, but I finally came across a website called Ghosts of America. I started to read, seeing as the website was kind of sketchy looking, if you ask me. Sure enough, I found my house and the exact property, and there was a submission from none other than a man named Dave, who, believe it or not, was our landlord. As I read down the article, it talked about how there was an apparent suicide in the home, and there were feelings of being watched, especially in the shower. Figures were often spotted in the first-floor bathroom, and some believe the most haunted room in the home was the master bedroom. The one thing that stood out to me most was they had mentioned there were tunnels in the basement. So I sent in a response with a small sliver of hope that whoever had posted this would check back and give me a response. I then went to check out the basement. I walked down there for the first time, expecting to see small tunnels made by rodents or other animals. But I couldn't have been more wrong. I showed my light to the back of the basement, revealing a hole in the wall about 3 feet off the ground. It looked to be about 3 feet by 4 feet in width and length, easily big enough for a person to fit through, but I refused to go any farther. One night I was sitting in my room, and my bed faced 4 big closet doors. As I was drifting off to sleep, I could hear the closet doors creaking, so I sat up curiously to see what was going on, and in that moment I watched all 4 doors open individually and close. Needless to say, I never slept in my room alone again. From that point forward, I slept downstairs. Time went by. Before long, we'd lived there for about a year. I was sitting up, sick, and I got that same feeling like I did that night in the shower. I started to look around nervously, and I could have sworn I saw someone at least 6 feet tall standing in the bathroom doorframe. I'd never been more terrified. Finally, it was time to move. We packed up all of our things, and on the last night, before leaving for the last time, myself, a close friend, and my parents were sitting on boxes in what was the dining room, eating some dinner. When I decided to bring up the incident of the figure in the bathroom, and I'm glad I finally did, my friend Alex looked shaky voice. I saw it too. I looked up in such shock and listened. He told me on one of the nights he spent the night on the couch. He woke up around 3 a.m. My mom, my dad, and I were gone due to a family emergency, and Alex was trusted enough to be there alone. It was then that he saw a figure in the doorway. Not knowing that we were gone, he said out loud, "Real funny." But when there was no response, he started to get nervous. That's when he grabbed his phone and quickly turned on the flashlight. He noticed the text for me saying that we had all left. By the time he looked back up, the figure had vanished without a sound. My dad then chimed in, saying he had seen it too. I'd never been more happy to leave for good that night. After moving and settling in with my grandmother, I was on my phone when I watched an email come through from someone anonymous. Once again, I never could have prepared myself for what I was about to read. This person stated that years back, they were sitting in their home directly across the street when they saw an abnormal amount of apparitions surrounding the home, but couldn't figure out what had happened. The following day, they went over to see what had happened, and they were told 2 lives had been taken in the home the night before. A father hung himself from the balcony in the kitchen, and the son followed suit on the balcony on the stairwell. The case never released in the papers, nor on the news. I still get chills driving by that house to this very day, and I hope I never have to go back. I live in Glasgow in Scotland. There's an abandoned hospital near where I grew up called Paranormal Hospital. Behind it, there's an isolated trail that the locals call the Haunted because of things that have happened there, or should I say, allegedly happened. There's a grave with a headstone where someone had their dead pit bull buried. And there are stories of teenagers in the 80s using the place for devil worship, which supposedly included animal sacrifice. It's quite a pretty place, though, with lots of wildlife, and despite being in the middle of a housing estate, once you're just a few feet along the trail, it's very isolated. I was 23 years old. I decided to take a few sandwiches and go for a walk through the Haunted for a bit of peace and tranquility. It was a beautiful and sunny day, and I was walking at a nice, leisurely pace, taking in the scenery and enjoying the weather. After walking for about an hour, I decided to stop for a rest, eating my lunch next to the lock. I just sat down when I suddenly felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't explain it. I was on my own, except for what appeared to be a cow at the other side of the lock, from where I was sitting, drinking from the water. I couldn't explain why it made me feel so uneasy, until the thing I'd taken for a cow suddenly stood up on its hind legs, and I found myself staring at a pure black figure standing about 7 feet tall with glowing red eyes. It looked like it was wearing a long, flowing black robe with a hood. I sat there, frozen in absolute terror for a few minutes. Then I left my stuff behind as I ran as fast as I could back the way I came. As I ran, a strong wind came out of nowhere and it felt like it was chasing me. I did not stop running until I was safely back home. Night, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time in my life. I couldn't move at all, nor could I make a sound. Then I saw it. Standing at my bedroom door was the same dark figure which I can only describe as some kind of demonic entity. This episode lasted for about 5 minutes before I was able to snap out of it. When I got up the next morning, I found that every crucifix and statue of Jesus in the house had been pulled from the walls or knocked off of whatever surface it was sitting on. For the next 5 nights, the same thing happened, except as the nights went on, the thing drew closer and closer to me. Then in the morning, I would find my holy relics on the floor. On the 6th night, when I once again found myself in sleep paralysis, that thing was standing right over me, its cold hands around my neck choking me. I could not breathe, and I genuinely thought I was going to die. I did the only thing I could think of, which was to say the Lord's Prayer in my head. It worked, and I jerked upright, but my neck was still sore. When I looked in the mirror, there were clearly bruises in the shape of fingers around my throat. The next morning, I phoned my uncle, who was a Catholic priest, and I told him what I'd been experiencing. He came up and blessed the whole house. Thankfully, after that, everything went back to normal. When I was around 7 years old, my parents and I moved into a rental house after selling our previous house. Prior to this incident, I hadn't heard of the previous owner at all and had no relation to her. One day, I believe it was a weekend, I woke up early as a kid. I slept in this tent-like bed cover, since I used to be terrified of the dark back then, and having that extra layer of security made me feel safer. I unzipped it as normal, but when I climbed out, I suddenly recognized this woman was not transparent. In fact, she looked as clear as day and was standing right outside my closet doors. She looked to be older, probably in her mid to late 80s. She even had a walker. I don't remember the exact details of her face, but I believe her hair was pulled back and she was sort of just bent over on her walker. She also had a very stern expression on her face, almost as if she was angry at something. I was, of course, frightened by her and immediately ran to my parents' room, explaining what I had just seen. My dad isn't exactly a believer in anything of the supernatural variety, so he was a bit skeptical. I mean, I don't blame him. I was a 7-year-old kid with a vivid imagination. But my mom was a believer of the paranormal, and still is. After hearing my account, she contacted the landlord and explained what I'd seen to him. The woman I described matched the description of the old lady who previously rented the place. She had died not too long ago. After this event, I never noticed or saw the woman in my room again. I don't have many theories on the matter. My only one would be that she hadn't realized she passed away yet, and was angry that I and my parents were now in her house. However, one detail still stands out to me. When people explain or give details about ghosts, they typically describe them as transparent or white in color. One thing I can say for sure is that this old woman was as clear as day. She looked as real as you and I. She wasn't transparent or anything of the sort. I haven't since experienced many paranormal encounters after this event. However, I still believe I saw something incredibly strange that day. This happened 8 years ago. I'm a female and was pregnant at the time. We lived in a small town, and since my husband was always working, I went to a majority of my prenatal appointments on my own. I had to drive to the next town, which was about an hour and 50 minutes away from my appointment. I didn't mind the drive, and I took the opportunity to see my family every time I went back there. On that day, I decided to go visit my aunt. She stayed in the house I grew up in. She inherited the house when my grandmother passed away, and my aunt lived there alone. The house was in the countryside, maybe a few miles from the nearest small town. This house had always been a place for paranormal and unexplained activity. I have quite a lot of other stories about living there and unexplained things happening there as well. This one, though, stands above the rest. It is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me while staying there. At around 4 p.m., when I arrived at my aunt's place, she told me to make myself comfortable. So I took a shower and relaxed. Since my appointment was on the following day, I wanted to try and rest. My aunt always locked all of the windows and doors despite living out of town. There were still a few close neighbors, and she did not like the idea of unlocked doors. She didn't have any pets, and at the time she had no security system. After my aunt left, I unpacked my suitcase and got some clothing laid out for my shower. I also grabbed my phone charger and plugged in my cell phone, as the battery was almost dead. That was when I heard what sounded like someone talking in the entryway of the side door. It sounded like 2 little girls, or younger girls. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I heard laughter. Curious, I decided to check if my aunt had left the window open. I went to look, but there was no one there, and the windows and doors had all been locked and shut. I thought, that's strange. Maybe it was the neighbors or someone passing by. I looked out all the windows facing the woods, road, and in the direction of the neighbors, but again I saw nothing. All the talking stopped while I was doing this. I shrugged. I couldn't explain that, and I was way too exhausted to care anymore. I grabbed some towels from the closet, but then I heard the voices again. Annoyed, I peeked around the corner and I called out saying, "Hello?" Again, nothing. Now I was getting a bit creeped out, so I went around checking again. No one was there, so I decided to go on with my business. I grabbed my towels and got into a warm shower. The water felt great, and I had some shampoo in my hair before long. My eyes closed as I felt the stress melting away. Then, out of nowhere, I heard humming. A female voice just started humming. It was coming from inside the bathroom. I had the door closed, and I had not heard anyone come in. My blood ran cold. I froze, I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I was going to faint. I knew there was no one in that house but me. As I said, I repeatedly made sure all the windows and doors were locked. My brain tried to process what was happening. I thought maybe my aunt had come back early. No, that can't be right. That voice did not match hers. This wasn't a voice I recognized at all. The humming continued. It was a sad, haunting tune, and I did not recognize the song. I stood there, frozen, too afraid to even peek or rinse the shampoo from my hair. After what felt like a minute, it stopped and it got very quiet. I was still frozen in terror, and if it wasn't for my baby suddenly kicking, I swear I would have passed out. I felt his little kicks in my stomach and it brought me out of my frozen state. I finally took some much-needed deep breaths, realizing I hadn't been breathing. I also got the courage now to peek. I opened the shower curtain just a bit, and of course, nothing. There was nobody there. Then I saw someone pass by outside as a shadow passed through the opening at the bottom of the door. I thought, good, my aunt's finally back. I hurried to finish my shower and grabbed my towel. After I gathered the courage to leave the bathroom, I went out slowly, calling for my aunt. But I was met with silence. I looked around and saw nobody. By then I was shaking and afraid. After searching the entire house, finding nothing, I ran to the guest room and immediately called my husband to tell him what was going on. He believed me, thankfully, as he always has, and he stayed on the phone with me until I heard my aunt coming back. I also told her what happened. She was freaked out to hear this, but she wasn't too surprised considering she apparently had her own experiences in that house as well. We had a lot of creepy experiences there, and this one just stuck with me. I've never heard the humming lady again, and I have no idea who she was or why she was humming to me in the bathroom. Part of me feared for my baby, hoping that's not why she came to hum that sad and haunting tune. I haven't been back to that house in a while, and my aunt has since moved out. My sister moved into there with her family. Now she has some scary experiences. I'm not really sure what's up with that place, but I feel like it might be the land itself. I'm glad I don't live there or go there too often nowadays, but I won't let it keep me from visiting my sister, though I do like to keep my visits brief.